So it's been a pretty calamitous start to the season for Spurs. They currently sit ninth in the Premier League. They've lost 3 of their opening 8 matches, and they were humiliated at home in the Champions League last week by Bayern Munich. To talk about what's going on at Tottenham, I'm joined by Charlie Eccleshare of The Athletic. Evening, Charlie.
Hello, how are you doing?
So, this has been coming, it seems, for quite a while for Tottenham, because their form ever since the turn of the year has been quite horrific. 22 points from 20 Premier League matches since mid-February. As you're right, is borderline relegation form. It's fewer points than Crystal Palace. It's similar to West Ham and Burnley. They lost over double figure in terms of games last season. What has gone wrong?
I think, it's complicated. It's not one thing. Broadly, Spurs were overachieving for some time. You know, you look at their outlay compared to a lot of their rivals, and it was far smaller. They didn't sign a player for 18 months, and in the 18 months basically leading up to them getting the Champions League final. So I think to a degree there was always going to be a point at which this happened, and many at the club feared it would happen unless there was a big shake-up. Because you've had the same players for so long, and there does reach a point at which it just gets a bit stale through no one's fault. For the players hearing the same voices, same manager. And I think that, coupled with the sense of deflation after that Champions League final defeat, has it's come together, and things are a bit flat at the moment. It feels like one way or another, they need freshening up.
The headline of the piece that you co-wrote with Jack Pitt-Brooke on The Athletic is "The place is a regime and they're sick of it." And Mauricio Pochettino was famed, and it was seen as very much a positive and worked wonders, these double sessions, how hard he pushed the players in terms of the energy, in terms of the press that Tottenham were able to put on, and it reaped its benefits for years. It feels as though it's gone a little bit stale. How much of that, from your reading of it, is down to Pochettino maybe not changing his ways as the squad has developed, and how much of it is down to not being able to freshen up the squad in the way he wanted? The fact that actually it is, by and large, a lot of the same figures who've been listening to a lot of the same thing for 4 or 5 years now.
Well, Pochettino wanted to freshen things up. I don't think this has come as a massive surprise. He wanted, as long ago as summer of 2018, there were a few players he would have been happy to get rid of. That didn't really happen, and there weren't any signings. So I think that's a huge part of it. It is just, Sir Alex Ferguson talked about 4-year cycles and how either the manager or the players needs to change after a 4-year period, because otherwise, through no one's fault, there is just a feeling of staleness. And I think that is what's happened here. I think actually, to give Pochettino his due, he has tried to shake things up a little bit. We're seeing them pressing less than they have previously. That was their calling card, but he's realised that isn't really possible anymore. The players had almost reached their physical capacity. Add in as well, a lot of them went deep at the 2018 World Cup, so there's a legacy of that. So I don't think he can be accused of rigidity necessarily. It may be, though, that there are kind of growing pains, because trying to evolve a team isn't easy. We've seen that many times. Even Sir Alex Ferguson had that when he was in the process of changing things. You might have a fallow year or two.
They did spend money during the summer, and I'm interested in your thoughts on their transfer dealings and where it did go wrong. So they spent a club record fee on Ndombele, who has shown signs that he could be a good Premier League player, if not more than that, but he's had a few injury problems. Giovanni Lo Celso came in, who was exceptional last year while at Betis on loan from Paris Saint-Germain, but again has been injured. The problem seems to have been actually they haven't been able to get rid of any players, and how destabilising that has been. I still think Danny Rose, as much as people talk about Christian Eriksen, a prime example whereby they decide to leave him off pre-season so that he can find a new club. He doesn't find a new club. He's suddenly parachuted back in, and he's pretty much first choice for the first 5 or 6 games of the season. And the sort of message that gives out, that sort of transfer policy of isolating players but then trying to bring them back in, is that of Pochettino's doing, or is that Daniel Levy's doing?
I think it's a combination. It wasn't the summer that he wanted, really. Yes, he was given some money at last and they brought in 3 players. But it's been unlucky because Sessegnon's been injured, Lo Celso's been injured, and Ndombele, I do think will become a good player, but he is taking a bit of time to readjust. And then, yes, you've got that situation where players, I mean, Danny Rose has been close to leaving on a number of occasions, but hasn't gone. And there's only so many times you can have that with players, I think. And you then look at, there are a bunch of guys whose contracts will expire at the end of the season. So that adds another layer of uncertainty. And I think a lot of supporters, would almost want some of those players to play less, because if they're not going to be there long term, why pick them? I don't think it's quite as simple as that. I think it's, if you've got an asset like Christian Eriksen, even if he's going at the end of the season, do you just not play him? I don't know about that. I think it's just unfortunate in a way, guys like Lo Celso, Sessegnon, who might have been able to phase out some of those 1-8 players, haven't been available. So his hand has been forced a little bit.
The stories that have been coming out about how frustrated the players are of the, as you're right, 5 years of authoritative controlling management, a relentless schedule, players complaining at how few days they're given off. Pochettino, he must realise this, he must hear this. Has he been making changes behind the scenes even since the start of the season, as things have started to get away from him, as he reacted to the negative vibes that seem to be around the dressing room?
Yeah, he has scaled down some of that intensity. As I was saying before, he has acknowledged the fact that high-octane pressing game was no longer sustainable. So, there have been steps made to do that. But Pochettino is an intense manager. And what's interesting, and you see this very often, is that, a manager's methods are praised. And then those very same methods are reframed once results don't go so well. So, pushing players is generally deemed to be a good thing. Then when results don't go so well, is he pushing them too much? And I appreciate, as a manager, you do have to adapt. And I think he is. I think he is trying to, change the way they play. But it's hard, because that has been what their success has been based on. And then playing in an entirely different way doesn't always come overnight.
You're right about the dressing room after the defeat to Brighton at the weekend, and the silence in the dressing room, that whether they were just shell-shocked, whether it was the injury to Hugo Lloris, their captain, or whether again it was a sign of a lack of character, a lack of leadership, that senior players weren't standing up and making their point. Has it all come to a head last weekend against Brighton, or has this been building of players, the likes of Harry Kane, Toby Alderweireld? Maybe they've said everything they can say. What's your sense of why a dressing room is like that after a defeat to Brighton?
Yeah, I think the silence, my understanding of it more was it was during the game, and, according to Brighton players, there was surprise at that, because, in a game such as that, when a team is losing, you would expect kind of more ranting and raving. And we've all played in football matches, and when you're losing, generally you're digging people out, or you're trying to encourage them, or whatever it is, but you're doing something. I do wonder how much of that Lloris injury kind of shell-shocked them. I was at the game, and it did feel, I said to the guy I was watching next to, I was like, it feels like Tottenham are here for the taking as soon as that first goal went in, because they were so flat. Now, Pochettino, in his press conference, said that he thought the Lloris injury was a big factor. He's their captain, their leader, and, these are humans, and, seeing him suffer a pretty horrific injury, was a big explainer for that. But I think that would have stood up more if this result had been a blip. I think, given the context of the fact they'd had some other dodgy results, it was disappointing, I think, for Tottenham supporters, and surprising that, given where they are and given what was at stake and given how badly they were playing, that there wasn't more of a reaction and that they weren't more vocal.
One of the reasons that there was so much love for Pochettino, even outside of Tottenham, probably in the English media, was that he was bringing through good young English players. Dele Alli and Harry Kane, very much the main two. Now, Harry Kane continues to deliver goals, but Dele Alli has just fallen off the face of the earth over the past 18 months. He's had a couple of injuries, but from a player who I think a lot of people expected would go on to be maybe one of the dominant attacking midfielders in the Premier League over the next 4 or 5 years, to somebody who maybe can't even get in Tottenham's first choice 11 at the moment. What's gone wrong with Dele Alli?
I think the injury he suffered, I can't remember exactly when it was, last season, has been a big factor. I don't think he's fully recovered physically from that, and now you find he's a little betwixt and between in what position he plays, and that's been added to by the sense that Son has made himself undroppable, and they seem to want to play Son and Kane as a two. I think partly to relieve the burden on Kane, who, physically has played a huge amount of football, suffered some bad injuries himself last year. So the main ball guy for that has been Ali, because his best role for me is playing off Harry Kane, getting on the end of things, because that's his game. He's a funny player in that you often watch him and he won't do a huge amount, but if he's scoring or getting assists, that's sort of fine. The problem is if he isn't doing that, then you're questioning what you're really getting from him. And I think that's slightly where we are with him at the moment. And I do just question how fit he is. He hasn't looked right for me all season. Maybe not getting called up to the England squad will be a blessing, and he can actually have a couple of weeks to work on his fitness. But yeah, I mean, he's symptomatic, isn't he, of that? What was a brave new world now seems like it's regressing slightly.
You'd wonder as well how many sleepless nights Pochettino's had about that decision not to start Lucas Moura in the Champions League final, considering what he had done in the semi-final, the form he was in. And from reading Guillaume Balaguer's book on Pochettino, which was essentially the diary of a season from a couple of years back, he is very self-aware, Pochettino, probably more so than most managers, and somewhat obsessed with his profile and how he looks and what people think of him. To make what in hindsight is that big an error in his biggest game, you'd wonder what sort of effect that's had on him over the summer as well.
Yeah, I don't know specifically about Moura, but I think that Champions League final has, he mentions it a lot, and it does seem like it has affected him quite badly. And you mentioned the book there, and in that book he goes on and on about a 5-1 defeat to Newcastle, which was the last day of the previous season. And it was actually it meant they finished third rather than second behind Arsenal, but it wasn't, it didn't lose in the league or anything, but it really sticks with him and he just can't get it out of his head. And on that occasion he channels it positively and they get through it. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he is stewing over that Champions League final. I don't think that's necessarily affecting the job he's doing, but yeah, he wouldn't be human. Anyone would have regrets over a game like that. It was very flat, and they were behind for more or less the whole game. Specifically on Moura, I don't know. I don't know if that's a regret he has. Moura, obviously, he scored that hat-trick, and you think he has to play. But then Harry Kane comes back, and do you not play him? So it was I can see both sides of that.
In that book as well, he sort of seems to flip consistently with his relationship with Daniel Levy, between feeling that they need to push on, they need to spend money, but also that he totally understands the way Tottenham operates, and he's bought into that. That was a couple of years ago. With his reputation having been enhanced so much over the last couple of years, and maybe him having a bit more of a bargaining chip in those conversations with Levy when it comes to spending money, he hasn't really let it out there that he was overly frustrated. Maybe that line that he was now the coach, not the manager again, which was a tipping point a couple of years ago. Have there been signs around the club at all that Pochettino is pretty pissed off about their summer transfer dealings?
As you say, it's weird because he's normally very, like the ideal club man and won't really, say anything. He'll sort of toe the party line, but then he does occasionally come out with these bombshells, that he's, that he could leave, or, I thought that one about him in the summer, him saying, maybe I should go back to being the head coach or the manager. That was, quite a spiky, pointed thing to say, which I think did betray a frustration. That he didn't feel it was the summer that he'd quite hoped for. There's been nothing subsequently, but that felt telling. And would be understandable. He has done. They've both done incredible jobs, really, when you look at the stadium and that side of things. But I can also see when you're Pochettino and you're doing the sort of job he has, and you feel we're so close to feel just not getting that final push would be very frustrating. And I do think that manager head coach outburst reflected that.
It had looked 6-9 months ago that maybe things wouldn't work out for him if he is to move on from Spurs, with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer gets the Manchester United job, Zinedine Zidane gets the Real Madrid job. As it's turned out, who knows, both those jobs could well be available again over the coming months. Has what's happened at Tottenham at the start of this season, and particularly with their league form at the end of last season, has it damaged his reputation, do you think, with other leading clubs and his possibility of getting one of those big jobs if he were to leave Spurs?
No, I don't think so. I think his reputation is well entrenched now. He's done such an amazing job over such a long period of time that, no, I think if even if it were to go horrendously and they were to lose their next 5 matches and he were to get sacked, which I think is unlikely, but even if that did happen, I think most clubs would be shrewd enough to say clearly something wasn't right. But that's happened. That's in the past. I think his reputation is pretty formidable now, and he could definitely get one of those big jobs, which, as you say, could be available fairly soon.
Charlie, great stuff. Thanks a lot for taking the call.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Charlie Eccleshare there from The Athletic, talking about the problems at Spurs, 9th in the table, and a tough task at hand as well to reach the knockout stage of the Champions League.